map and recorded that, that the City of Reading language be incorporated to participate in an assessment district that, or other financial mechanism that would occur so that this property or its assessors would be required to sign on the dotted line. So I can show you other photos of setbacks and so forth, but I know we've exceeded our time limit here, and I'd respectfully request on behalf of the Mains and myself that the board adopt alternative 1, which is the intent to approve the general plan amendment, and direct staff to prepare the appropriate resolution of approval. Be more than happy to answer any questions. We would like to have the opportunity to respond to any of the citizens that may speak with respect to this project, either for clarification purposes or rebuttal. If you have any questions, be more than happy to answer them. Thank you very much for allowing me the time limit beyond the 3 minutes. It's very much appreciated.
Any questions of Mr. Diaz? Not at this time.
Thank you.
Oh, Mr. Haas?
Just a comment. It was very thorough.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Appreciate it.
And yes, I will allow you the chance to rebut, as I will allow any citizen who wants to rebut any of the stuff after we're concluded. So, my next speaker request is from Nick Gardner.
That's me.
Okay, Nick, thank you. Followed by Michael Quinn.
How do you show this map here?
You just,
I hope it's on here. When the Mains first came up with their proposal, they had the neighborhood meeting, and they said, you can have this, it's a 32 lot development, or we'd like to do the 6. But they didn't mention that it can stay the way it is and just have 2. I took the petition around the neighborhood, and I assume you got your copies that I took to you.
yes, we did.
I made it very clear. Wilshire area residents who do not want current 5-acre minimum changed. I knocked on every door, 53 doors. The homes that weren't home, I went back that evening and knocked on. There were 2 homes vacant. I didn't stop at the Mains, nor George Theobald. He wants to stay neutral. 41 signed the petition. I didn't have to explain to them anything. They want to subdivide it, and we want to keep it 5 acres. 41 signed it. 1 was in favor of the zoning change. I would question Andy's 47% support. I would question whether they were aware of the fact that the zoning doesn't need to be changed. And I'd like to know the number of houses that was approached and asked that. You know, as far as liability goes on that piece of property, all they got to do is build a fence, put up no trespassing signs, if that's a worry. It doesn't serve much as a buffer. It's a buffer now. It's perfect. I never heard anything about the water board. Nobody was really concerned about them. We're concerned about our neighborhood keeping its rural flavor and staying the way it is. We like the zoning the way it is, and we think that this will have a significant impact on our way of life. The whole neighborhood, 80% that I talked to, are opposed to this. The Planning Commission is opposed to it, and I would appreciate it very much if you turn it down.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner.
Thank you. Did you get to see this? Oh, yeah, there you did. This is just a scare tactics, all this is. City of Reading doesn't want to annex this place. I talked to Doug DeMalley. They're not interested in providing water, they're not interested in providing sewer, and they're not interested in annexing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. Mr. Quinn?
Mr. Chairman and Board of Supervisors, my name is Mike Quinn. I'm currently a resident at 3538 Wilshire Drive, which I'm renting and also in negotiating for the possible purchase of that property. I also own some interest in a flag lot off of Sherrill Drive, which borders on the property owned by the Rothers. I looked at this proposal and could see only benefit to the neighborhood there in putting, if you're going to put a buffer around a neighborhood, putting larger parcels, larger houses, higher value in there. I didn't see any reason that it's really of any concern to anybody along Wilshire where it turns and goes along the river, for the reason that those people are not going to impact that whatsoever. And if you put a buffer in there of 100 feet, if you go back, and in fact, I looked at a piece of property that's currently going up for sale across the street, almost directly across the street from the parcel where I live, and you can't even see it back there to begin with. And if you add another 100 feet to it, there's a huge buffer. This is really a concern of, well, you know, and the not in my backyard, literally. And earlier, one of you stated, well, we need to start things happening. We need to get things going. I don't see the panacea coming in one big blast into Shasta County. We have to do little things like this. I see it as a benefit to that community. You know, it could, at some future time, turn into the 32 lots that they're talking about, which nobody would want. This is, again, a very, very thought out proposal. You know, I think that it would increase the value of people's properties, knowing that there's higher value. When you look at selling a house and you're going to put, you know, comparable sales, you're going to have those comparable sales in there. Those houses are going to go, you know, for more. They're going to be brand new. They're going to be on almost 1.5 acres. This is a value to us down there. And, you know, if I buy down there, I would like to see that happened. I appreciate your time on this.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. That's all the speaker requests I have at this time. Does anybody else want to come before the board during the public hearing? Yes, please come up and state your name.
Thank you. My name is Linda Batten. They never came to talk to me. The parcel they want to change to smaller density is right in front of me. They never have called me or talked to me to see what I thought. It will impact me. It will impact all of us in that area, and not to a good thing either. We have a beautiful area. It's very unique. I'm a real estate agent, so I know what he says about the houses going up in value, where right now they're really not. And building a lot of houses out there is not going to do anything but sit there. They did try to sell it. They asked way too much money. They didn't take pride in even the real estate sign. It was never, we finally had to take it down because it fell down and no one ever came to pick it up. So it was a nuisance to us. We try to keep it nice in the area. All the neighbors love it. No one, the get together they said was like Nick said, they only gave people 2 options, not to stay zoning as it is. I would like the zoning to stay 5-acre minimums. Someone can build a beautiful, 2 beautiful homes, right now they could have horses or whatever they want. We just have a lovely, lovely area that's very unique to Reading. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Batten. Anybody else?
My name is Gene Rother, and I have the Rother property next to this. I would like to comment on the maps that they are showing you, showing 1.45 acre lots. Along Henderson, there's a 30-foot road easement. If you add that all up, that's 0.8 of an acre. On the back side of those lots is a gully, and I have no way of knowing how much area is back there, but I suspect there may be a 1/2 acre to an acre. If you take that off in proportion to each of those lots, I would think that the lots would be down to maybe 1.3 acres, maybe 1.2. This is getting quite small. I am not opposed to putting 2 houses on the property as is legally available to them today. But to change the COK, I believe that's the correct term, terminology to allow them to change and build 6 houses on there or 5. I think it's wrong to change that reading because it would only benefit this particular piece of property. The way it's worded, there would be no other person, including myself, that could take advantage of this 1 acre parcel or 1.5 acre parcel size. If you really read that proposal, I think you'll see my point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rother.
My name is Marcia Sigmund. I've lived in that area now for 40 years. This is a very unique area. We have wild turkeys, wild deer, all kinds of birds. It's just a wonderful paradise down there. We have no parks in our area, and with this open area, it's allowed deer and turkeys and other animals to be there, and we don't want to lose this type of environment for our children or for the area. As if they go to wells and septics down there, it's going to put further pollution in the soil, and already the pollution level has risen in our wells just from the people that are inhabited there. So we don't want further ground pollution in there either. In case of an emergency, all the streets down there are dead end except for 2, which is Wilshire Drive and Henderson. And that's the only way for all the people in that area to escape that area of flood, anything that happens. We only have 2 outs, but putting more homes down there, you're going to impact the area of any way to escape that area in case of an emergency. As far as their statement about sending letters out and knocking on doors, etc., I would venture to say that I am home almost 100% of the time. I go to the grocery store and then I'm back home again. I'm retired and that's my home. And they have never knocked on my door to my knowledge. None of my neighbors ever said, oh, you had a visitor knock at your door today, but you weren't home. And all my neighbors sort of keep an eye on the place when I go to the store or anything. They've never telephoned me, so I don't know where they're making all this communication now. Hasn't been at my house. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good morning. My name's Wayne Barney. I have lived on Wilshire Drive since 1967. Obviously purchased that property because of the unique environment that we have down there, the wonderful neighborhood. The lifestyle is something that probably would be envied by a lot of areas around us. Just one comment, when the Maines had their initial meeting, I think it was 3 years ago, they failed to invite Mr. Rother. Probably something that I think his influence in this area with the property that he owns certainly should have been considered. So I don't think that they've made the effort to contact as many people as they have indicated. My concern is that my backyard goes to what would be the property back, the back part of the property. That property drops down like this. My well is right here. So concern about water is definitely a factor, whether it impedes the ability of our water table or sewage becomes an issue down there. That's all riverbed soil. So there are concerns about possible contamination or lack of water. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barney. Anyone else? Mr. Diaz, anything further?
Not so much a rebuttal, but just a clarification. Mr. Rother will be able to, if he wanted to take advantage of the general plan amendment, be able to do something with his property along Wilshire. With regards to Ms. Sigmund just discussing the issue of the loss of wildlife and all that and so forth, They still have the 210 acres of the Rother property that could be utilized for that. And I think Mr. Barney raises a very, very good point, but I think we need to recognize that this is a general plan amendment. What follows next would be a rezoning and then the tentative map. And as part of the requirement of a tentative map, we have to prove sewer and water and so forth. That testing has all been done. It's passed, but again, it's not something that we're submitting as part of this application. Keep in mind that Mr. Barney, currently his primary residence is located 150 feet from the western boundary of the main parcel. With the additional 100-foot buffer being proposed, he would now be 250 feet from his primary residence. Plus, the majority of those residences along there do have mature stands of trees that provide a visual buffer, in particular Ms. Batten's property and so forth. So again, clarification, not trying to rebut and get into a argument or anything like that, but we still have work ahead of us, but the commitment is to the minimum 1.45 acre parcels and the buffer is proposed. And so,
Mr. Supervisor Hawes, you have a question?
Yeah, what's the distance between your well and your septic? Isn't it a couple hundred feet?
I think it's a 100-foot requirement. It's shown in one of the maps, excuse me. Uh, 100 feet setback between wells and any sewage system.
Okay, and how far is this from the Sacramento River?
A lot further away than all the other properties along Wilshire. I would imagine it's probably, I would venture to say about 500 feet.
I think it has to be more than that. If you're talking 250 feet just from that to the one you got to the, like Mr. Barney's property, you got across Wilshire Drive, and then there's more
Right.
property there, so I suspect it's more.
Probably like 700 feet, 800
The
feet.
reason I mentioned that was just the amount of water. I mean, the Sacramento River spreads out underground a lot farther than that. I mean,
Yeah, one of the things that we tried to do was, as you know, in looking at the initial study, staff didn't see any problems with water, sewage disposal, and so forth. And one of the things we wanted to do is we wanted to focus on the main objections that staff had was with regards to land use. They didn't bring up the issue of the wells and septic and all that. Obviously, their initial study identified it. Now, we could have brought you the results of the studies, the perk tests and all that, but again, it's not really part of this, but we did have that information.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Diaz.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no further, I will close the public hearing. Does the board have any questions of staff before we continue here, or? Supervisor Kehoe.
Thank you, Mr. Modi. It seems to me that Mr. Diaz has made some captivating observations, and I'd like to get Mr. Simon's take on the discussions that have ensued since we've opened this matter.
And before we continue with that, I think I'd like to disclose that I have, since it is in my district, I have had several email conversations with the Main family over the last 18 months to 2 years, probably about 4 or 5, and then I did have one meeting with the Mains and with staff. I can't remember how long it's been now, like 8 months, 9 months ago, and that was more due to the process, I think, and how long it was taking was most of the discussion, so I do want to put that out. Mr. Ball, you have some? You certainly would have had any opportunity to call me. I would have been happy to meet with you, sir. Mr. Ball?
Yes, thank you, Chair Modi, as I am always open to meeting anyone that calls. I would like to declare that I've actually been a guest in Mr. Main's classroom multiple times in Anderson, and thank you for your teaching. We do appreciate it. I don't know the Main family personally. I met with them for a very short moment where I referred their conversation appropriately to the supervisor whose district this resided in. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
Excuse me, Mr. Hawes, you have something?
I just received a call and answered back that I'd rather not discuss it, so that's where I am.
Okay, Mr. Simon.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, members of the audience, Mr. Lees, County Council. I'm Rick Simon, the Assistant Director of Resource Management. I have been involved with this project from the very first phone call from Terry and Charles, Maine, who are obviously part owners in the property in question. This was several years ago, and they had put forward a suggestion which eventually led to their application to amend the general plan. They were asking whether or not there was a general plan designation that the county could see applying to their property that would allow them to develop at the densities that they had been proposing, which was about 1 acre to 1.5 acres per parcel. Interestingly, and I think this is very telling, in searching through the county's general plan, there is no alternative general plan designation that would be appropriately applied to this situation. As you're all aware from some of the maps that you've seen and from the discussion, this is an island that is almost in the geographic center of the city of Reading. It's a very desirable area in that it's got the river access and currently at least some open space in the form of this undeveloped property as well as the Rothers. But the general plan that applies to Shasta County does not anticipate low-density development within the boundaries of an incorporated city or even adjacent to the boundaries of an incorporated city or even a county town center. That's why the suburban and urban residential designations are applied to these lands. The idea is that when you've got a population center the size of Reading or even going out into the county, if the size of Bernie or Fall River Mills, some of the recognized rural community centers, that's where you want to encourage the development of public services, including utilities like water and sewer. If you start spreading out into lower density development within those potential population centers, then you preclude the ability to pay for the expansion of those kinds of services. Now, that is a backdrop. Shasta County is obligated to provide for its growth, anticipated growth, both locally anticipated, which is reflected in our general plan, as well as other forces that are outside of Shasta County, such as the Housing and Community Development Department at the state level, that takes a very keen interest in how much land is available within Shasta County to accommodate the growth that, in the bigger picture, they anticipate would be coming our way. So all of that kind of creates this context whereby we can develop local policies and local objectives as to how we want our communities to develop. In 1984, this general plan was adopted as we know it today. It's been regularly updated about on 5-year increments so that it remains up to date and relevant to the community's desires and the needs of the community. That's when that designation of suburban residential was placed on this property. To me as a planner, to us as a planning department, it makes perfect sense that this would be an area that you would, perhaps even above others that are designated suburban or urban residential, that you would target for the ultimate urban type development as it is within the center of the city. It has access to transportation networks. It has access to public utilities and public services, schools, and so on. All of those things that are desirable in an area where you would direct more development to occur. The discussion with the Maines ended up being something to the effect of there is no other alternative general plan designation that would be appropriate for this property. And so then the next question was, well, what would it take to change the policy in order to allow the kind of development that we have in mind? And I will say that as a neighbor, I would probably prefer seeing 1.5 acre lots to maybe 26 lots on that property as well. But that would be my own, perspective, not looking at the bigger picture, what we're required to do. Then it became about what kind of policy would be appropriate in order to allow us to do that. And we deliberately took what some could consider to be a hands-off approach. We said, here are what our concerns would be. Precedent setting, where, again, it's been pointed out a couple times, we've got about 10,000 acres of similarly designated lands throughout the county, and that's up in Shasta Lake, it's to the east of Reading, it's to the south, even to the west and north. So there are a lot of areas, enclaves of land that is designated similar to this, suburban residential. So we were concerned that if you open the policy wide up, then it would really take away from the integrity of that policy altogether, because then we would see the slow erosion of that reserve of lands that are appropriate and appropriately situated for urban type growth. So that was one of the concerns. We didn't tell them do this or don't do that. We said that would be one of our concerns. The other concern on the other side of that spectrum is that you create an exception that is so narrowly construed that it amounts to what someone could say a special privilege for this particular property owner or that particular property owner, because it is, again, so narrowly worded that it really would practically only apply to a very small set of property owners, when in fact there are about 10,000 acres worth of similarly situated lands. And that's a concern that we would have as well. So the Maines actually came up with their language, and we responded to that. As Mr. Diaz accurately indicated, the first go-round, there were no limitations on what properties could qualify other than the parcel size, but it didn't set a time limit. In other words, any parcel that's 10 acres at the time of adoption, could be eligible for this. There was no limitation like that, and so the Rothers could very easily have applied to a subdivision of their 210 plus acres into 5-acre parcels or 10-acre parcels, and then applied that exception to that entire 210-acre area, which we said that looks like an environmental impact report would be required, because if we're going to take 230 some odd acres and develop that at 1-acre lots, we better take a look at the traffic, at the air pollution, at the, all of the things, the water quality, the sewage disposal systems and so on, all of those things that would be involved in a subdivision of that size. That was the reason for the determination of an environmental impact report. Not wanting to go through the environmental impact report process and also believing that there was something of a misunderstanding of what their intent was, they revised that language. And that's what you have before you today is our response to that was, if we just look at those 8.7 acres and we project what would happen in that area if 6 houses were to be developed on that, as opposed to the 2 that could be developed now, we don't believe that the physical impacts to the environment would rise to the level of requiring an environmental impact report. But we're looking at it at the general plan level. It's the so-called 30,000-foot exposure, where we're looking down on the big picture, and that seemed relatively minor in terms of the physical impacts to the environment. It's much more of a policy issue. And so what we agreed to with the Maines was that we would look at this amended language, this very narrow language, do an environmental assessment of it, and get it before the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors, really to wrestle with the policy issues, which are really the main issues, the primary issues that are at stake here is the integrity of the policy, the requirement that the county plan for the future, long into the future. There was a question as to what the general plan timeframe might have been in the previous public hearing item, and right now I believe it goes to the year 2025. But we are in the process of updating that even again, that will stretch it out for another 5 or 10 years. So we're looking at generally a 20 to 25-year time frame. What is going to be needed? So that's where that policy lies now. It reserves lands that are appropriate and within reasonable proximity to the expansion of services for that time when those services could be made available. And it reserves lands in large enough parcels that when it is developed at urban densities, there will be enough development there to be able to pay for those expansions. If you start going low density, then you preclude that option into the future. So kind of a long-winded response, Supervisor Kehoe, but that provides a bit more of the background on this.
Thank you, Mr. Simon.
Supervisor Ball.
Thank you, Chair Modi. These may be questions for Mr. Salazar, or maybe you want to answer them, Mr. Simon, I'm not sure. Can you put the map back up there that shows the existing parcels and the site for this?
Chairman Baugh, this is a attachment 3 of your staff report. It's a general plan map for the area.
Oh,
Will that suit
you
you?
just promoted me. Got the
I'm
chairman
sorry,
over
I'm
here,
sorry.
so.
I'm sorry.
And he was going to mention
Supervisor
it, so
Baugh.
I thought I would,
Yeah.
I would give it up there. You know, that will work. I'm familiar with the parcel, but I just wanted to draw some questions out here during this process. I have driven by the parcel, and I did take the time to also bring it up on Google Earth and check out the neighborhood in its entirety. The existing size lots there, the lots most adjacent, can you describe the size of those lots? Immediately to the west, thank you.
I believe those are about 3/4 of an acre, if I recall correctly.
And then going north, can you tell us about those lot sizes?
Well, these lots were developed in the 1940s and 50s, and I think they range from a quarter to like an acre or a little bit more in that general vicinity.
Okay, I had heard the area referred to as a rural neighborhood, and I would agree that there's a lot of open space adjacent to the neighborhood, but the neighborhood itself reminds me of most of the other neighborhoods, fairly dense. I think my most interesting thought in this entire report perhaps has very little relationship, but I just can't help but draw it out anyway. It came from the Department of, and I will have another question or two for you, but it came from the Department of Transportation, signed by Michelle Millette, Chief. In the third paragraph, it says, while approval of this proposal for single-family homes and a remainder parcel would result in fewer vehicle trips on the roadways, it does not provide the necessary density to make transit service viable, a viable transportation option. I can't help but point out the fact that it's very rare that we see Caltrans complaining that it's not dense enough. We certainly could have used that in some other prior comments. But getting back to the density that it's there has been some differences presented. I've heard the term 32 houses. I calculated your thought of 3 per acre at 26 myself. I heard Mr. Simon mention 26. I've heard mention 1 plus 1 more home that could be added. Could you clarify those different results?
Okay, I believe that the Mains own 2 properties there currently, the larger property that's outlined in black here and a property that fronts Wilshire Drive there. Assume that each of those is a legally created parcel, and under the current zoning and policies of the general plan, they could develop a home on both parcels. So as it exists right now, 2 homes could be developed.
By today's standards.
By
And then
today's
there is
standards.
the possibility of
There-
annexation.
There is the possibility if water and sewer services were to be extended to develop at a density as high as 3 dwellings per acre under the suburban residential general plan designation. If sewer and water were extended, the applicants could entertain a general plan amendment, map amendment to the urban residential designation, which would allow for the up to 16 acres, 16 dwellings per acre, maximum residential density. So I think that's where those numbers come from as far as the 26 units, and then the larger map that you saw earlier, I think, contemplated an urban residential designation.
Okay, and then looking on the same map that you have up there, can you tell us how those existing homes in the adjacent areas are served by public services? Well, I'm talking about water and sewer.
Water. Well, as I stated earlier, these lots were subdivided in the 1940s. The lots along Inez Street and Brent Road here to the north were annexed into the city of Reading, primarily based on the desire of people in that area to access water services, and they do receive City of Reading water service today. There's actually a City of Reading water service or water line that runs along Wilshire Drive here, just a few hundred feet away, or less than that, probably 100 feet away from the applicant's properties. There's water nearby. None of those properties are served by sewer at this time.
And so those are the only lots that are served by water? The rest of the lots we're looking at are wells?
Yeah, these here to the west are served by wells.
Okay. You know, I took a great deal of time to go through the presentation and the information submitted by the Mains, and Mr. Diaz was very thorough, as was noted by Supervisor Hawes. I think the end result for me is that you've got the county completely surrounded by the city of Reading. Annexations are driven by residents, not by the city. The city's not going to go out there and force people to annex. And so you've got the never land of, I think you used the word in your report, at such time. And that such time, it could be next week. Maybe something could happen that would change that possibility, and that property could be opened up to a very dense housing population, which would certainly take away from any hope of the larger 1.5 acre parcels. And yet, likelihood of annexation is not in the near future, I don't think. I think the owners of the property, the Mains, find themselves in what I would call planning hell. There's not just nothing they can really do with the property other than sit on it and fence the 8 acres and perhaps build one more home with what happens today. And that's why we exist. We exist to perhaps consider exceptions. I am open to considering an exception for these parcels. I find that their proposal, that is not before us today actually, but their intention to reserve this for larger parcels, the 1.5 acre almost density, actually would be a benefit to the community as opposed to the higher density that is planned for it. If I were in that neighborhood, I would much rather see that than what is possible on the property. I'm not sure what it would take for us to, as a board, to make that approval of, instead of denying, as has been recommended by staff, making an approval, but I would like to consider that.
Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Hawes?
Well, just, it was made mention about putting up no trespassing signs. I've been a landowner in the county all of my life and have put up no trespassing signs. And you'd be surprised how many people can't read when it comes to a no trespassing sign. So
That's right.
I find them to be, excuse me, very ineffective in controlling whether people enter your property or not. So that one just doesn't go anywhere with me.
Supervisor Hartman?
I agree with Supervisor Baugh's comments. I think the integrity of the neighborhood will be served by allowing this sort of development that's not that high density that could happen in the future. I think the property owners have the right intention. I think they should have the ability to use their property in a way that's going to benefit the county and the neighborhood as a whole. So I also am in favor of finding a way to approve it.
Well, for my comments, you know, we call it interim residential, but I think we ought to call it limbo residential, because you're kind of like in no man's land. And then eventually it could be suburban residential, which makes sense to me, that eventually that if it's in the heart of the city, you'd want to set it up so we'd have perhaps the high density development to use all the services in the center of your city. But I think that this property, and I say this property, I mean the whole area down there, is so unique because it is county in the center of the city, totally surrounded. And as was discussed here, if there was a definition of catch-22, I think this is it. We're telling the Mains that, well, you should just wait until it becomes high-density housing and annexes to the city, and then, hook up with them. But I won't put words in Mr. Rother's mouth, but I believe in the past he's indicated that he has no desire to annex to the city. He has, at this time, no desires to just develop his 200 acres. I also am very aware that the majority of the citizens who live down there don't want to be annexed in the city of Reading, and it was stated by Supervisor Ball, the city certainly is not going to try to force an annexation. So here you are in this area that you're saying, well, wait until you get annexed, you can have high-density housing, but no one wants to annex. So you're just in the middle of nowhere, and you're just sort of hung out to dry, and you can't get anything done. It's certainly not equitable, I think, to think that for 5 or 6 houses, you're going to ask people to put in $250,000 worth of infrastructure to hook up to the city of Reading. If the situation was the existing lots that were down there were all 2, 3, 4 acres minimum already, and we were proposing, or the Mains were proposing lots smaller than theirs, I think I would be more sympathetic with that. But it's just the opposite. They're on 3/4 acre lots, maybe a little bit larger in some of them, and the Mains are proposing larger than that, perhaps double that size. I think that's a good fit with that area. It in some areas protects them from that, if there is a future development, which I don't think there actually will be. I don't think that area, quite frankly, is ever going to get annexed to the city of Reading. I don't think that the residents want it, and the city's not going to make someone do it, so it's going to stay this island. And so I think you end up leaving the Main sort of in this catch-22, where back in the, as you stated, Mr. Salazar, the 40s and 50s, when these lots were developed at 3/4 acres, and now we've come along and we've put our general plan, which I think I found very interesting, Mr. Simon, that you talked about, that, the plan is there, and it's sort of, it's a general plan to look at what our future is going to be, where our growth is going to be, and then we come along every 5 years and we try to make changes to it and stuff. I think the language is written very specifically to protect the other 10,000 acres of suburban residential that you want to have out there, so it doesn't fall under that. We sort of put the Mains into the position of, you have to come up with something very direct and very distinct to our property, otherwise you're going to endanger our other 10,000 acres, which we don't want to have. In the rest of the county, you have the possibility of, as the city grows outwardly, that there could be expansion and annexation, but the center area is so unique and so different. It is a beautiful place to live. The people want to keep it that way. They don't want to have 3 houses per acre. I get that part. I think this fits in with that part of it. And I think the last thing, I think, was you mentioned, Mr. Simon, you said that one of the people that you talked to, one of the agents, I think, said, really this is a policy issue. And I agree with that. This is not so much the planning issue as it is the policy. And I think that we need to step back and say, common sense-wise, forget all those other little things we have hanging out here. Common sense-wise, what makes sense for this area? And I prefer to have development of the area in larger parcels than 3 per acre. But certainly the 5-acre minimum is something that I think is just at this point in time is unreasonable based on what I see that area being for the next 50, 100 years. And that's not a whole lot changing. And I know the bigger parcel that Mr. Rother has, I know he wants to keep it a lot the way it is at this time, and I don't expect him to change that. And so I think, in my opinion, the right thing to do for our community is to make this thing happen. Supervisor Ball.
Well, thank you, Chair Modi. Along with that thinking, I'm going to place a motion so we can continue discussion if desired. And I believe I'm talking about your alternative on the staff report number 1. Make sure I do this correctly. Speak now, Mr. Simon, or forever hold your peace. It says, declare as a board our intention to approve the general plan amendment as proposed and direct staff to prepare the appropriate resolution of approval. Would that cover it?
That would provide us the direction, yes, and we would come back with a resolution.
I'll ask the same question of legal counsel. Is that appropriate?
Yes, it is.
Very good. I'll place that into a motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Under discussion, Supervisor Kehoe.
Thank you, Chairman Modi. There has been some mention, Mr. Simon, that the proposed general plan amendment may create internal inconsistencies with the plan. Now, give us some background on that.
The general plan is required to be consistent on a couple of different planes. One is a vertical plane and one is horizontal. The horizontal plane is consistent with other policy documents within the county. The zoning plan, for instance, would be an example of the zoning must be consistent with the general plan. So there's consistency among documents. The other plane is within the document itself. So if you have a policy that indicates development should occur in this area at this density, and you've got another policy in a different part of the plan, or even in the same part of the plan that says, well, actually, this area could be developed this other way at this other density, that creates an internal conflict. If someone's looking at this policy, how do they reconcile that with this other policy or notion of implementation? So that creates a situation where any kind of project that is approved based on either one of those policies could be subject to challenge. And so what it does is it makes your general plan and the development process as a whole vulnerable to challenge, whereby if there is a conflict inside the general plan that's identified and that's associated with an approval, then that approval can be subject to challenge or vulnerable to challenge.
In your presentation, you mentioned that change in the general plan could be tantamount to, according to the applicant, a special privilege. What's your thinking there?
The thinking, again, as Mr. Salazar indicated in the initial staff report, is that the general plan looks at the county as a whole, and the policies, objectives, and implementation measures of the general plan should apply equally throughout the county in all lands or similar situations. So if you've got property that's, using the immediate case here, if you've got property that's designated suburban residential in one part of Shasta County, it should be subject to the same rules and regulations and opportunities as suburban residential land in another part of the county, unless there is some kind of resource or geographic or other implementation factor that should be taken into consideration. Sometimes a county will adopt a specific plan or an area plan where you take a specific geographic area, and because of its unique features, you make those general plan policies unique or apply more appropriately to that particular part of the county. That hasn't been done in this case, but that's something that could be considered. So when you're looking at the special privilege, if you were looking at a zoning variance application, the state law requires very specific findings in a zoning variance, and I would like to make an analogy with that. The findings require that if someone is asking for an exception to the rules that apply to everyone else in a similar situation, there has to be something unique and different about that property that without the special consideration, they would not be able to do what everybody else could do on their property. In other words, if you had, the typical example is you've got a 1 acre lot and half of that lot is occupied by a large rock outcropping. Well, it'd be hard to meet all of the setbacks necessarily under that scenario and still be able to have your detached garage or shop on your property. There simply isn't enough room. But everybody else can have their detached shop and their detached garage because they don't have that rock outcrop. Well, you could make consideration of some special circumstances. They've got this physical constraint that without special consideration, they are actually going to be denied the privileges that everybody else has. That's the concept with a variance in the zoning code. Something similar, I think, is an appropriate process here. Is there something unique about the properties that we're dealing with right here that warrant special consideration? And a privilege that is afforded to this particular property owner that other property owners in the SR, suburban residential designation, are not afforded. That may be enough. I would maintain that in that consideration, we have identified, or the Maines have identified, some issues that make their property unique. It's completely surrounded by the city of Reading. There are other lands that have been, other variable densities from half acre, quarter acre, all the way to 3/4 of an acre. But I would suggest that in that 10,000 acres of other suburban residential land, certainly there are enclaves that can be found to be unique. By allowing this to happen in this manner, I foresee the potential of chipping away at all of those suburban residential lands around the county, because putting services in place are expensive. There's no question about it. That's why this policy reserves lands in big enough parcels that they will pay for themselves when the time is right. Now, and I don't want to suggest that that's going to happen, but it certainly is a possibility when you start whittling away at the integrity of a particular policy for a particular property owner. Other property owners will say, well, what about me? That's certainly a possibility. And if I might, if we're still under discussion here, throw out an opportunity to consider that if this area is in fact unique, and I don't argue that there are some unique features in this entire island surrounded by the city of Reading, if the board is considering making an exception or allowing what you have determined to be common sense development in an area like this, that rather than granting this specific exception, that you direct our staff to investigate what kind of land use designation might be appropriate for a situation like this, where it wouldn't just apply to the Maines. It would apply to other similar suburban residential properties, and again, give those folks the opportunity to make an argument that it ought to apply to them as well, and propose a general plan amendment, not of the policy, but of the designation on their properties that would be equally applied whenever there are similar situations. So that would be an alternative that, as this discussion has evolved, comes to mind. It's not on your staff report because we didn't anticipate that, but that is something that I would like to put out there for consideration.
You know, I might be open to that if you had suggested that 3 years ago. I'm a little disappointed that the Maines have been, and that's when I mentioned earlier that I had some discussions with the Maines. It was mostly over the frustration over the process that they had submitted paperwork and would wait for 4 to 6 months and not hear anything. Told it would go to the Planning Commission. They waited for 9 months. It didn't go to the Planning Commission. They waited, they waited, they waited. I'm not sympathetic to your suggestion at this point that now we should go back and somehow delay this process for how many more months to go through this whole thing again. I would have wished we would have heard that 3 years ago. I'm not buying that. As far as this uniqueness of this area, I agree, and I think your outcrop rock situation is perfectly describes the city of Reading. I think that they are the rock here that, had we done this correctly 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we would not have allowed the annexations to continue to occur around this area and make it into an island. We would have forced the issue back when and somehow resolved this thing. But we didn't do that. And we're here today to take care of the situation. And again, we have put all the property owners down there in a situation where they're sort of forced to try to do something with their property, if they're not doing with it, or sit back and wait for the city annex it, which quite frankly is just never going to happen. It's just, I mean, I'll make wagers today, and we'll all come back to life up 200 years from now, and it'll still be county property. So, yeah, I just think that there is a uniqueness to this area. I understand the concern about protecting their general plan, but you know what? If there are other areas out there that are so unique and have situations that are so difficult, maybe we ought to be looking at those as well when they come forward. Supervisor Haas.
Well, this isn't the only unique place. It's all over the county. You've got these small lots at Churn Creek Bottom. You have them down on Riverland Drive in Anderson. You've got them in Cottonwood. They're all over the place. So I think from this day forward, we need to look at just what you said, what you brought up. But I don't think we need to look at it before we make a decision here. But I think we need to address that, really. I've thought that for a long time, and I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think we really do need to look at it. Thank you.
Supervisor Hartman.
Thank you. I think yeah, things may have been overlooked or mistakes made, or we can't exactly tell the future. So I think it's our job as a board and those that come after us to look at these issues that come up in these special circumstances, and I believe this is one. And like Supervisor Haas says, okay, we've seen an example here. We understand that it may come up again in the future, and let's be prepared. Let's start looking at it so that when other property owners come before the board, we've looked at it from this generation and this time frame and what the potential changes may be. So I don't want to hold up this. I think the Main family has gone on long enough, and it makes sense to move forward in this direction. I think we need to do it.
Supervisor Baugh.
And just to confirm, I would like to stick with my original motion, and I would be willing to consider your suggestions for similar circumstances in the future.
Any other discussion? Supervisor Kehoe?
I very much appreciate the dialogue that has gone on today, and for me, it's a very close call. I appreciate your alternative, Mr. Simon, and I'm personally persuaded to go along with that in opposition to the position of my colleagues.
Any other discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
Motion carries 4-1.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. And we are adjourned.
That's yours, that's fine.